Have you ever felt like you're being watched? Not just a fleeting glance from a stranger on the street, but a persistent, unnerving stare that seems to follow you everywhere. For Noah, this feeling wasn't just a paranoid thought. It was a chilling reality that unfolded every single morning. It all started with the trees. The dense woods that bordered his backyard seemed to have a life of their own. Every morning when Noah would look out his kitchen window, coffee in and the tree line felt closer than it had the day before. At first, he dismissed it. Just my imagination, he'd mumble to himself, blaming it on the early hour or the lack of caffeine. It was a subtle shift, almost imperceptible, like the slow creep of a shadow as the sun moves across the sky. But the feeling of unease was anything but subtle. It was a cold knot that tightened in his stomach each time he looked out that window. Then he saw it. Or rather, him. Nestled between the thick, dark trunks of the ancient oaks, far in the distance, stood a figure. It was impossibly tall and unnaturally thin, dressed in what looked like a dark, formal suit. The stark contrast of the black suit against the green and brown of the forest was jarring. The figure never moved. It never gestured, never waved, never so much as tilted its head. It just stood there, a silent, motionless sentinel in the deep woods, a statue carved from shadow. The first time Noah saw it, his heart hammered against his ribs. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. It was still there. He told himself it was probably just a weirdly shaped tree stump, a trick of the light and shadow. But the next morning, the stump had moved. No, not the stump. The figure. It was still between the trees, still motionless, but it was undeniably closer. The details were a fraction clearer. He could almost make out the crisp lines of the suit, the unnerving length of its limbs. A week passed, and with each sunrise, the silent observer advanced. The woods themselves seemed to be encroaching on his property, the first line of trees now just a stone's throw from his back porch. And with the trees came the man. He was close enough now that Noah could see he had no discernible facial features. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a pale, blank canvas where a face should be. The sight sent a primal fear coursing through him, a terror that was ancient and instinctual. Noah's days became consumed by this silent horror. He stopped enjoying his morning coffee. The view from his window, once a source of calm, was now a portal to his deepest fears. Sleep offered little respite, his dreams filled with images of endless forests and a tall, faceless man in a black suit. He tried to tell his friends, but the words felt hollow and insane. There's a man in my woods, and he's getting closer every day. They offered logical explanations. He was a hunter, a surveyor, a prankster, but Noah knew what he was seeing was not of this world. Desperate for proof, he grabbed his phone. He needed to show someone, to validate his sanity. He stood at his window, hands trembling, and aimed the camera at the figure. He zoomed in, trying to get a clear shot, but every photo he took came out blurry and distorted, a chaotic swirl of pixels right where the figure should be. It was as if the camera itself recoiled, refusing to capture the unnatural presence. He tried his expensive DSLR, fiddling with the focus, adjusting the settings. The result was the same. The woods were crystal clear, each leaf and branch perfectly defined, but the space occupied by the faceless man was a digital smudge, a void in the image. This digital blindness was almost more terrifying than the figure itself. It was proof that this thing, whatever it was, operated outside the rules of our reality. The feeling of being watched intensified. It no longer felt confined to the woods. He felt eyes on him inside his own home. He'd be washing dishes and feel a cold draft, a sudden certainty that someone was standing right behind him. He'd whip around, only to find an empty room. He started locking all his doors and windows, even during the day. He drew the curtains, plunging his house into a permanent twilight, but it didn't help. He could still feel the stare, burning through the walls, through the fabric of the curtains. One morning, after a night of fitful, dreamless sleep, Noah woke up with a feeling of profound dread. It was heavier than usual, a physical weight pressing down on his chest. He forced himself out of bed and crept to the kitchen window, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He peeked through a slit in the curtains. The first thing he noticed was the silence. The usual morning chorus of birds was gone. The woods were unnervingly still, He scanned the tree line, his eyes searching for the familiar, horrifying shape. It wasn't there. For a dizzying moment, relief washed over him. Was it over? Had it finally gone? Then he looked down, and the relief curdled into pure, unadulterated terror, leading from the edge of the woods, across his manicured lawn, all the way to his back door, was a trail of muddy footprints. They were long, narrow, and impossibly deep, as if whatever made them was unnaturally heavy. He followed the trail with his eyes, from the dark maw of the forest, across the dew-covered grass, up the 2 small steps to his porch, and ending abruptly at the back door. The door he had triple-checked was locked before going to bed. He slowly backed away from the window, his breath caught in his throat. He couldn't hear anything, but the silence was screaming. It was then he realized the truth. The trees had stopped moving closer. The morning routine was broken, because the figure was no longer between the trees. It didn't need to be. A floorboard creaked behind him. The sound was soft, almost hintly, but it shattered the silence like a gunshot. A cold draft snaked around his ankles, carrying the scent of damp earth and decay. He didn't want to turn around. He wanted to close his eyes and pretend he was still in bed, lost in a nightmare. But he knew. He knew he wasn't alone in the room. With a final, shuddering breath, Noah slowly turned around. The faceless man was there. He was no longer in the distance. He was standing right behind him. Maya couldn't sleep. The house was silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the gentle ticking of the clock on the wall. It was one of those nights where your mind just refuses to shut down, replaying the day, worrying about tomorrow. She tossed and turned, fluffing her pillow for the 10th time, before finally giving up. With a sigh, she threw back the covers and padded out of her bedroom. The floorboards cooled beneath her bare feet. The living room was bathed in the pale glow of the streetlights outside, casting long, eerie shadows that danced and stretched across the furniture. She found the remote on the coffee table, its familiar shape a small comfort in the late-night quiet. Sinking into the plush cushions of her sofa, she aimed it at the dark screen and pressed the power button. The TV flickered to life with a soft hum, illuminating her face. She started flipping through the channels. A late-night talk show host was interviewing some celebrity she didn't recognize. Click a documentary about deep-sea creatures. Click an old black-and-white movie she'd seen a dozen times. Click. She went past news channels, cooking shows, and endless infomercials, her thumb moving almost on autopilot. Then she landed on channel 12. Unlike the others, it wasn't showing anything. Just static, and noisy, chaotic blizzard of black and white pixels, accompanied by a harsh, grating sound like 1,000 whispers all at once. It was strange. In this digital age, static was a relic, a ghost of old analog broadcasts. She hadn't seen a screen like this in years. All the other channels were crystal clear. Why just this one? Curiosity piqued. She didn't change it, she just watched, her eyes trying to find a pattern in the chaos. And that's when she saw it. Or thought she saw it. Something else was there, hiding behind the digital snow. A shape. It was faint, almost a trick of the light. A tall, slender silhouette standing perfectly still in the middle of the screen. Maya blinked, rubbing her eyes. Was she just tired? Was her mind playing tricks on her? She leaned forward, squinting, trying to get a better look. As she moved closer to the screen, a strange thing happened. The harsh hissing of the static seemed to soften, its volume dipping as if reacting to her presence. And with the decrease in noise, the shape became more defined. It was unnervingly tall, its form stretched and thin. It had long, impossibly long arms that hung limply at its sides. Its head was a smooth, pale oval, completely devoid of features. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a blank, unnerving surface. A cold shiver traced a path down her spine. This wasn't a broadcast error. This was something else. Her heart began to beat a little faster. Suddenly, the screen flickered violently, the static roaring back to its full, deafening volume for just a second before settling down again. In that brief flash, the figure on the screen moved. It tilted its head, a slow, deliberate motion, as if it were observing her right back. That was enough. A knot of pure fear tightened in her stomach. Her hand trembled as she fumbled for the remote. She didn't care what it was. She just wanted it gone. Her thumb slammed down on the channel up button. The screen immediately switched to a car commercial. Bright, loud, and jarringly normal. A wave of relief washed over her, so potent it left her feeling dizzy. She took a deep, shaky breath, her heart still hammering against her ribs. It was just a glitch, she told herself. A weird, creepy glitch on a dead channel. Her overtired brain had filled in the blanks and created something sinister. That had to be it. She let out a nervous laugh, the sound swallowed by the silence of the room. She was being ridiculous. She was about to turn the TV off and try to go back to bed to forget the whole thing. But then, before she could even lift the remote again, the TV switched itself off. The room was plunged back into near darkness for a moment, the silence now feeling heavy and oppressive. And then, with a soft click, it turned itself back on. Not to the car commercial, not to the news or the old movie. It went straight back to Channel 12, but this time it was different. The static was gone. The harsh, hissing sound was replaced by a dead, unnerving silence. The screen was no longer a storm of black and white. Instead, it showed a video feed. The quality was a bit grainy, like a low-resolution security camera, but the image was perfectly clear. It was her living room. Maya froze, her blood turning to ice. She was looking at a live feed of the very room she was sitting in. She could see the back of her sofa, the lamp on the end table, the corner of the rug peeking out from underneath. It was her home, displayed on her own television. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Who was filming? Where was the camera? There was no camera in her living room. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of a hidden lens, any red recording light. She saw nothing. Everything was exactly as it should be. She looked back at the screen, her breath catching in her throat. The camera angle was strange. It was positioned high up, near the ceiling in the corner of the room, looking down, a perspective she had never seen before. And then she saw the movement. On the very edge of the screen, just at the border of the camera's view, something shifted, something tall and dark. It was the figure, the tal slender figure from the static. It was standing just out of frame, but she could see the edge of its smooth, featureless head and a long, pale hand entering the shot. It wasn't on the TV anymore. It was in the room with her. She didn't scream. The sound was trapped in her throat, choked off by pure terror. She was completely paralyzed, her eyes glued to the screen, watching the feed of her own living room. She could hear the ticking of the clock, each tick a hammer blow against the silent dread. The hand on the screen twitched, its long, thin fingers curling slightly. It was right there, just a few feet away, in the corner of the room, hidden in the shadows just outside her line of sight. And it was watching her. She knew, without a doubt, that if she turned her head, she would see it. She didn't dare turn her head. She just sat there, staring at the screen, waiting. Liam never had much of an imagination. He was a practical kid, grounded in reality. The world was what you could see, touch, and prove. So when he found the old, leather-bound notebook under his bed, his first thought wasn't of magic or mystery, but of simple misplacement. He tugged it out from the dust bunnies and stray socks, flipping it over in his hands. The cover was worn smooth, with no markings or title. He frowned, trying to remember where it could have come from. It wasn't his. He would have remembered a notebook this distinct, this old-looking. He didn't own anything like it. Curiosity got the better of him. He opened it. The pages were thick, yellowed with age, and filled with sketches. They weren't just doodles. They were intricate, almost obsessive. Page after page depicted dense, suffocating forests. The trees were unnaturally tall, their branches like skeletal fingers clawing at an unseen sky. There were no animals, no birds, just an endless expanse of woods. Mixed in with the trees were strange symbols, geometric shapes that seemed to twist and writhe on the page, making his eyes hurt if he stared too long. Then he saw the figure. It appeared sporadically at first, a faint outline in the background, almost hidden among the tangled trees. But as he turned the pages, the figure became more prominent, more defined. It was tall, impossibly so, with limbs that were too long, too thin. It wore a dark, featureless suit, but the most unsettling part was its head. It was completely blank. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a smooth, pale oval. A chilling sense of familiarity washed over Liam. A half-remembered ghost from childhood stories whispered on the playground. Slender Man. The name echoed in his mind, a cold whisper from the past. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach, a primal fear he couldn't explain. He wanted to close the book, to shove it back under the bed and forget he ever saw it, but he couldn't. He had to see it all. He flipped through the remaining pages, the forest scenes growing darker, more claustrophobic. The tall, faceless figure was on every page now, sometimes peering from behind a tree, other times standing starkly in a clearing, its posture impossibly still. He reached the end of the sketches and found a final, blank page, save for a few words scrawled in a frantic, messy hand at the very back. The ink was faded, but the message was clear. It read, "Do not follow." Liam slammed the notebook shut, his heart hammering against his ribs. The message felt less like a warning and more like a command he had already broken just by opening the book. He shoved it deep into his desk drawer, underneath a pile of old homework and comic books. Out of sight, out of mind. Or so he hoped. That night, his sleep was anything but restful. He dreamed he was walking, not in any place he recognized, but through a forest. The very same forest from the notebook. The trees were towering monoliths, their branches interlocking overhead to block out the moon and stars, plunging the world into a perpetual twilight. The air was heavy and still, the only sound the crunch of dead leaves under his feet. He walked for what felt like hours, a growing sense of dread pressing down on him. He felt watched. It was a tangible sensation, a prickling on the back of his neck, the feeling of unseen eyes boring into him from the oppressive darkness between the trees. He'd spin around, his eyes darting into the shadows, but there was never anyone there. Just more trees, more silence. Yet the feeling persisted, a constant, unnerving companion on his endless walk. He never saw the figure from the book, but he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that it was there, watching, waiting. Liam woke up with a gasp, drenched in cold sweat, the phantom crunch of leaves still echoing in his ears. The morning light filtering through his window was a welcome relief, chasing away the lingering shadows of the dream. For a moment, he could almost convince himself it was just a nightmare, brought on by the creepy drawings. He sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, and his gaze fell upon his desk drawer. It was slightly ajar. He was sure he had closed it completely. A cold dread, familiar from the night before, slithered up his spine. He tried to ignore it, to get on with his day, but the pull was too strong. With trembling hands, he opened the drawer and took out the notebook. It felt colder, heavier than he remembered. He hesitated, the scrawled warning flashing in his mind, "Do not follow." But he had to know. He opened it to the first page. The forest was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer just a random sketch. He recognized it. It was the view from his bedroom window, but twisted, nightmarish. The familiar oak tree in his backyard was rendered tall and menacing, its branches like grasping claws. Beyond it stretched the endless, dark woods from his dream. His blood ran cold. He frantically flipped the page. The next drawing was of his room. Every detail was perfect: his unmade bed, the posters on his wall, the pile of clothes on his chair. And there, in the corner of the drawing, almost lost in the shadows, was the faint outline of the tall, faceless man. Liam's breath hitched. This was impossible. These pages weren't here yesterday. The notebook was drawing his life, his world. He flipped through the new pages, each one a step further out of his room, a hyper-realistic sketch of his hallway, the perspective skewed and unsettling. A drawing of his living room, the furniture looking alien and strange under the artist's hand, and in every single drawing, the slender figure was there. Getting slightly closer, slightly more defined with each turn of the page. It was in the hallway, at the far end. It was in the living room, standing by the television. He felt a wave of nausea. He was being documented. Hunted, his safe, familiar home was being turned into a map for this thing. He reached the last of the new drawings. It was his front door. The detail was immaculate, down to the small scratch near the doorknob. But in this drawing, the figure wasn't in the background. It was standing right outside, its blank face seeming to stare directly at him through the page, its long, thin hand resting on the door handle. Beyond that page was the final one he had seen yesterday, the one that was supposed to be blank, but it wasn't blank anymore. As he stared at the empty yellowed paper, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a dark line began to bleed into the fibers, as if drawn by an invisible pen. It started as a single letter, then another, the ink spreading slowly, deliberately. Liam watched, paralyzed by a mixture of terror and fascination, as a sentence formed right before his eyes. The handwriting was the same frantic scroll from the back of the book, but the ink was fresh, dark, and wet. It read, "You are getting closer." A floorboard creaked in the hallway, just outside his bedroom door. Liam's head snapped up, his eyes wide with terror. He was alone in the house. His parents weren't due back for hours. The sound was slow, deliberate. Another creak, closer this time. He didn't dare breathe. His gaze darted from his bedroom door back to the open notebook in his hands. He could hear it now, a faint, almost inaudible static, like a radio tuned between stations, seeming to emanate from just beyond the door. He scrambled backward on his bed, kicking the notebook away from him. It landed on the floor with a soft thud, still open to that final, terrible message. The creaking stopped. The static grew louder. Silence descended, thick and suffocating. Liam's eyes were glued to the doorknob. He watched, holding his breath, as it began to slowly, silently, turn. The latch clicked open with a sound that was deafening in the stillness. The door began to swing inward, inch by agonizing inch, revealing the dark hallway beyond. And standing there, framed in the doorway, impossibly tall and thin, was the figure from the book, its faceless head tilted slightly as if observing him. The world dissolved into static. He wasn't looking at a drawing anymore. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video. Sweet dreams. The trail on the map was a confident, solid line. Promise. But here, deep in the sprawling woods, that promise had dissolved into a tangled mess of identical trees and deceptive clearings. Emma checked her phone again. No signal. Of course, she'd been walking for what felt like hours. The initial flicker of annoyance, now a full-blown blaze of panic. Every instinct screamed that she'd taken a wrong turn. But which one? Every direction she chose seemed to loop her back to the same gnarled oak tree, its branches like skeletal fingers pointing at the sky. The forest itself seemed to be holding its breath. The usual chatter of birds and rustle of unseen creatures had faded into a profound, unnerving silence. The air grew thick, heavy, pressing in on her from all sides. It felt like walking through water, each step a struggle against an invisible current. She called out, her voice a small, pathetic sound, swallowed by the immense quiet. The only reply was the frantic thumping of her own heart. That's when she saw it. Far in the distance, through a thin veil of mist that hadn't been there moments before, stood a figure. It was unnaturally tall and slender, a stark, dark silhouette against the muted greens and browns of the forest. Just a trick of the light, she told herself. A strange tree formation. She blinked hard, trying to clear her vision, to force the shape to resolve into something mundane. But when she opened her eyes, it was closer. A cold dread, sharp and immediate, pierced through her panic. It hadn't moved. There were no footsteps crunching on the leaf litter, no sound of branches being pushed aside. The distance between them had simply compressed. One moment it was a distant anomaly, the next it was a clear and present threat. Her mind scrambled for an explanation, for any logical reason, but found none. It was just there, closer, its featureless form an affront to nature. She didn't need a second thought. Emma turned and ran. She didn't care which direction. Away. That was the only direction that mattered. Branches whipped at her face, Roots snaked out to trip her, but she barely felt it. Adrenaline was afire in her veins. She risked a glance over her shoulder. It was still there. Not running. Not chasing. Just keeping pace. It glided through the dense woods with an effortless grace that was utterly horrifying. It didn't need to run. She pushed herself harder, lungs burning, legs screaming in protest. She scrambled up a steep incline, digging her fingers into the damp earth, and tumbled down the other side. Every time she thought she'd put some distance between them, she'd see it. A flash of black through the trees, a tall, thin shadow standing patiently at the edge of a clearing she'd just burst into. It was always there, a silent, relentless observer. The terror wasn't in the chase. It was in the absolute certainty that she could not escape. It was playing with her. The forest became a labyrinth, designed by a madman. Every path led to nowhere. Every clearing was a trap. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, grotesque shadows that danced and writhed like living things. The figure seemed to grow taller in the fading light, its presence more oppressive. Hope was a dying ember in her chest. She was going to die out here. She sank to her knees, exhausted, defeated. Tears streamed down her dirt-caked cheeks. She couldn't run anymore. She waited for the end, but nothing happened. The figure simply stood at the edge of her vision, a silent sentinel in the deepening gloom. It didn't approach. It didn't retreat. It just watched. After a long while, a strange numbness settled over her. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was blanketed by an overwhelming exhaustion. She didn't know how much time passed. It could have been minutes or hours. Then, through the haze of her despair, she saw it. A flicker of something unnatural. Not the tall, dark figure, but something else. A small, wooden signpost, nearly swallowed by ivy. Painted on it was a crude arrow and the word trail. It was the path. It was right there. How had she missed it? It was as if it had just materialized out of thin air. Scrambling to her feet, she didn't question it. She stumbled toward the sign, her body moving on autopilot. With one last terrified glance behind her, she looked for the figure. It was gone. The forest behind her was just a forest again. The oppressive silence had lifted, replaced by the gentle chirping of crickets. It was as if the whole nightmarish ordeal had been a fever dream. She followed the path, her feet finding a new strength. The trail was clear, well-trodden, exactly as the map had promised. In what felt like no time at all, she was back at the trailhead, her car, a beautiful, mundane sight, under the parking lot lights. She fumbled with her keys, her hands still shaking, and threw herself inside, locking the doors. She drove away without looking back, the tires squealing on the asphalt. Weeks turned into months. Emma tried to put the experience behind her. She told herself it was dehydration, exhaustion, her mind playing tricks on her in a stressful situation. She'd gotten lost, panicked, and hallucinated. It was the only explanation that allowed her to sleep at night. She sold her hiking gear and avoided even looking at pictures of forests. But something was wrong, a nagging inconsistency that pricked at the edges of her carefully constructed reality. She remembered the panic, the running, the soul-crushing, despair. She remembered the tall, silent figure that haunted her every step, but she couldn't remember the escape. She could picture the signpost, the blessed arrow pointing the way to safety, but the memory was flat. It lacked a visceral relief, the surge of hope she should have felt. She couldn't recall the feeling of the ground under her feet on that final stretch of trail. She couldn't remember the details of the path that led her out. There was just a blank space between her giving up in the clearing and finding herself back at her car. It was a missing piece of time, a gap in the film of her life. And then there were the other things. Little things. Sometimes, she'll be in a crowded room and feel a sudden, isolating silence, the same heavy quiet from the woods. She'll catch a glimpse of a tall, thin lamppost out of the corner of her eye, and her heart will seize with a primal fear. She'll go unexplained. Worst of all are the moments just before sleep, when she closes her eyes and the darkness behind her eyelids isn't empty. She feels a presence there, in the quiet of her own mind. It doesn't move. It doesn't make a sound. It hoostwaits, and in those terrifying moments, a chilling thought takes hold. She remembers finding the trail, but she doesn't remember how. Maybe the trail didn't lead her out. Maybe it just led her somewhere else. And maybe, just maybe, a part of her never really left those woods at all. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more unsettling tales. Stay safe out there.